Okay, we're good.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everybody being able to attend, making the time for our pre-bid meeting for War Memorial Field Improvements Phase 2B, parking and boat launch. I'm sure we're all getting familiar with the Zoom meetings, electronic format, but just like to start off by requesting everybody save questions for the end so we can minimize stepping on each other. We'll certainly leave some time there for questions at that time. For those that don't know me, I'm Dan Taddick. I'm the city engineer, project manager for the city of Sandpoint. My contact information is here. Let me actually share my screen so you can see it. There you go. At the top of the screen there, I work for Amanda Wilson. She's the Infrastructure and Development Services Manager. And also Cheryl Hughes is with us here. Cheryl is our contract procurement officer, and Cheryl is the contact for any questions that come up during the bid. You'll want to submit those in writing to Cheryl. Just to introduce our design team, Del Hatch is on with us. He is the principal landscape architect with Bernardo Wills Architects. We've also got James Davis, landscape architect with Bernardo Wills. Nathan Wright is a civil engineer with Welch Comer, and Zach Yarbrough is electrical engineer with Kaufman, and they will all be joining us today if they haven't already. For those of you that are familiar with the kind of standard ISPWC contract, general conditions, supplementary conditions, you're familiar with the structure of the engineer essentially during construction, and in many cases that is the engineer is the liaison between the owner and the contractor. In this project, the city will serve as the engineer in terms of the all rights and authority assigned to the engineer in the contract. So that just means that the city will be the direct contact for the contractor. We will work with them as necessary. That will be for submittal reviews, obviously, as well as site visits during construction. And somebody is typing at the moment. Perhaps they could mute. I'm not sure who that might be, but perhaps they could mute their mic. Thank you. In terms of scope of work, the project consists of a reconstructed and expanded parking lot, boat launch, and other related civil, electrical, and landscape improvements at War Memorial Field located in Sandpoint, east of Lakeview Park, due south of Ontario, and north of the Pond Oreille waterfront. The work generally includes demolition, removal of obstructions, excavation, trenching and piping, backfill, grading, cast in place concrete, asphalt paving, parking lot lighting and miscellaneous electrical, timber piling and boom log installation, irrigation, landscaping, fencing, rockery wall, and other features. The engineer's estimate is between $600,000 and $1.5 million, including both bid schedules. The prevailing wage is not applicable in this case, so Davis-Bacon does not apply, neither does Buy America. The city is not maintaining a plan holders list. We get that question often. A couple things of note, Sandpoint business licenses are required for all contractors and subcontractors on the project. In terms of schedule, bid opening is planned for February 25th at 2 p.m. The deadline for bidder questions is 5 days prior to bid opening and must be submitted in writing to Cheryl. And deadline likewise for substitution requests is 5 days prior to bid opening. We are anticipating a very quick turnaround to council award at the very next meeting on March 3rd, and just providing a week or so in the anticipated timeline for notice to proceed, March 10th. There is one interim milestone on the project, and that involves basically being ready to receive a restroom unit that will be built and installed by others. That's a small CXT restroom. There's some plans included for reference within the bid docs. What we're asking for by May 14th is being ready to accommodate that delivery and installation of the pad by others. So that includes the pad prep, compaction, utility stubs, etc., per the drawings and specifications. Additionally, the site must be capable of supporting their equipment. So we did not specify that you're required to have it paved out, but that may be required. We wanted you guys to be able to analyze that for yourselves and determine what the correct or where you need it to be for that installation to happen. Basically, they're going to come with a truck and trailer, deliver the unit. They need a crane on site to pick it and place it. And those details of the delivery equipment are outlined in the contract docs. So there are liquidated damages associated with failure to meet that milestone, set at $1,000 a day. Substantial completion of the project is set for essentially 2 weeks later, May 27th. What we're trying to do is beat the Memorial Day activity at the site. The boat launch gets very active even with the floats not installed at that point. So we've got liquidated damages of $2,000 a day associated with failure to meet the requirements of substantial. Final completion set for June 11th, liquidated damages at $500 a day. So before we get into some of the specifics of the project and walking through the bid form in detail, I just wanted to highlight some of the overarching work requirements. Those that were familiar with our phase one and project requirements, these are going to be very similar. We're trying to be good neighbors to recognizing this project is in a residential neighborhood. So we're asking that all work, we're requiring that all work be performed between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. There's no restrictions on days of the week. You can work all 7 days. Haul routes, we want to limit to Division and Ontario. Again, that's to minimize the impacts on the local residential streets surrounding the project. In terms of staging, obviously the parking lot's part of the project, but that's what we have. That's what we have provided for you on the job. With the caveat that there must be access provided for the city to get to the lift station that's sitting in the middle of the parking lot at all times. The city has obtained the encroachment permit from the Idaho Department of Lands, which was included in the bid package that was published last week. We also just received the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit yesterday, and we will be adding that via addendum. Just to highlight, those permits require work to be done in the dry, essentially no equipment in the water. So obviously keep that in mind when you're planning and scheduling your work activities. A SWIP plan has been developed for the contractor to include the necessary coordination with SHPO and biological assessment completed as well. So that's just to expedite the process upon award. And that draft SWIP essentially will be provided in a Word doc made available to the contractor upon award, so you can complete it and submit it. There is some utility coordination on the project. Avista coordination is required. Zach will get into that a little later when he's walking through the electrical scope items. And also the city has a couple minor efforts involved in the project. One being reestablishing a water service to the existing lift station. There's a stub right to the existing fence now. It's really just running it in, and your role in that is basically just accommodating our crews to be able to complete that work. And there is installation of a meter associated with a future boat rinse station that will be installed on the eastern edge of the project. So our crew will install that meter. The contractor will be responsible for all other items associated with that pay item. Others work at the site, obviously mentioned CXT and the restroom. One important note as well, the existing floats for the boat launch were relocated last fall when the water was still in, and they were moved in order to facilitate this construction this spring. Otherwise, they'd be grounded and in your way right now. So we're not anticipating the water being insufficient to allow for those floats to be in by your substantial completion deadline. Therefore, the city will be floating those back into place once the water lake level rises. So just to make sure you're all aware of that. And wanted to highlight that the existing war memorial, we're essentially working all around it, but we obviously want to make sure that we're protecting that in place and not impacting that important community asset. Bid requirements, obviously you see instructions to bidders, but the bid form is required with the bid, a bid bond, 5% of the bid amount. That includes both bid schedules. The State of Idaho Public Works Contractor's License Number, please include that on the bid form. There's a space for it. And the naming of subcontractors form is required per Idaho code as well, and that was supplied with the bid package. So at this point, the intent is to jump into the bid form and walk through the pay items one by one, kind of by discipline, so you understand what's involved with each item, and also highlight any unique or maybe important notes that we want to make sure the contractor's aware of. First off, on the bid form is broken into bid schedule A, associated with the parking lot, and then bid schedule B, associated with the boat launch. And so we'll walk through them in that order. We'll walk through bid schedule A and then bid schedule B. And obviously there'll be some redundancy, and we may just kind of gloss over some of those items that we already discussed from one to the other. Before I turn it over to Nate to start walking us through some of the civil items, just touching on mobilization. I think we're all familiar with that, that pay item. Just to highlight, there is a special provision associated with that item. It modifies how it's to be paid. If you're familiar with the ISPWC standard, this just establishes different thresholds at which we can pay certain percentages. So I recommend everybody familiarize yourselves with that. And I guess at that, I will turn it over to Nate to walk us through the civil items. Make sure we can unmute you, Nate. Maybe Cheryl needs to do that.
No, he would unmute himself.
Can everybody hear me now?
We hear you.
We hear
All
you.
right, perfect. So I think these first items, the construction traffic control, I think that's hopefully self-explanatory. The SWIP, like Dan said, we will provide that in a Word document. You'll see in the example that there's several items that are highlighted. The document itself will be locked, but those items will be available for you to change and modify as necessary. Construction surveying, we can provide the control, but ultimately that's going to be on you guys to stake that. Removal of obstructions. There's just some miscellaneous things that have been called out in the plans and specs that are just going to need to be removed. Asphalt. Again, we're just going to be removing the existing the parking lot. There's some exploratory excavation in and around the lift station, and then also on the northeast side, there's a fiber optic line that we're going to be running a land drain in the area of. As far as unsuitable material, that's primarily just cut fill from the parking lot, and then there's also some, material that's going to be accounted for in the boat launch, but that's, I guess, in the separate bid schedule.
Yeah, just to highlight, I guess, sorry, jump in, Nate. The way the specs are written, and I'm sure Nate would touch on this later, but it seemed like a good segue. The excavation, base, compaction, rebar, et cetera, for the concrete, flat work, and curb pay items is incidental to those items. So the excavation quantities that Nate just described, unsuitable material, excavation, and haul off site is specific to the areas of asphalt. The concrete elements, it's included within the concrete pay item.
Correct. So sidewalk, curb gutter, excavation associated with those are going to be incidental to the curb gutter and sidewalk. Also the Rockery Wall, any excavation there as you're relaying that would be associated with that wall. We've got the storm drain line that's running from our detention ponds. There is a 6-inch line that's going to be running from the existing lift station to, we call them mushroom pits on the south side of the property, but just south of the boat ramp, there are some small depressions which are going to be used for treatment of stormwater. There's a couple manholes, catch basins. There are some existing structures that are going to have to be lifted to grade. There's some curb drops in the curbing. We are intending to put geotextile fabric under the asphalt as a separation material. So that's something that's called out in the details, but we just want to reemphasize that. One thing that I am going to say is important. We have a waterway that runs, Dan's going to pull it up. It's over on the northwest side of the project. It's at a fairly, it's at a minimum slope, and we've got some rough survey from the curb and gutter that was put in this past winter, but we just want you as a contractor to verify that that slope is met, that 0.4% minimum slope is met. With that said, there is some flexibility if we need to raise that asphalt. So the curb may not be 6 inches if that's necessary. So that's definitely something we're going to want to pay attention to during construction and just make sure we're meeting that slope so that we get flow in that waterway. I mean, I think the rest of these are relatively straightforward. One unique thing with our detention pond, due to the fine nature of the soils, we are going to be lining that with a membrane to prevent water from getting under the asphalt and potentially heaving the asphalt. And so that's something just to be aware of. And then also with the painting on the boat trailers, we've got some dashed lines that run down the middle that will work as a separation for football games and other events that occur there that aren't during the prime boating situation. That'll just act as a separation so standard vehicles will know where to park during those times.
And just to add to what Nate's saying, the parking lot currently is signed and functions, and we intend to reinstall and install new signage that articulates from Memorial Day to Labor Day. It's boat and trailer parking only. But then in those off seasons, we wanted some delineation trying to indicate where people can park. So that's trying to reflect those dash lines that Nate was just describing are intended to reflect that, you know, that's two spaces in the off season essentially.
Yeah. One other thing. So the the city is intending to install a power wash station. Dan's going to show you, it's just on the east side of the property right there. As part of this contract, we intend to have a concrete pad with electrical and water stubs up through that. And then the city will then make the connection and install the unit on that. But we do need to provide the stubs. Similarly, Dan's kind of touched on this, but the CXT unit will be similar in the sense that the contractor will be required to provide the gravel pad as well as stub all utilities per the CXT plans. We have run into issues with this where because that's considered a building that a plumber may be required. And so I just want to throw that out there, that you may want to consider that as well, that may be necessary for anything underneath that structure.
And Nathan, since CXT will make the final installation, they will be responsible for pulling the permits and having the plumber and electrician on site to make those final connections to get that building. So
Okay.
that isn't part of this contractor's scope.
Okay. The other thing, I guess, with the CXT is that concrete is to be pinned to the CXT building. And so there will be the concrete work directly surrounding that building is going to have to wait until after that is installed, which Dan touched on. I believe it's May 10th. Is that correct, Dan?
May 14th.
May 14th.
Yep. So
there will be some concrete work that's going to need to be done after that. So just plan accordingly. The other thing I just want to hit on is our plans call out an ADA kayak launch to be installed by others. So that will be a separate item from this, but all of the piles are going to be driven as part of this scope. So the piles will be put in, and then that will be the ADA kayak launch will be done as a separate project. I think the last thing that I wanted to touch base on was just the gangways for the existing docks. So as Dan mentioned, the existing docks were relocated last fall. We are going to need to put a steel plate on those docks that the gangway will be able to connect to. And then the gangways will need to be assembled and ready to be installed, but the city will actually place them in place once those docks are brought in. So we need everything connected up to the abutments and ready for that connection to simply be dropped into place. It needs to be a removable connection so that they can remove them annually if needed. So I think those were kind of the main things that I wanted to touch base on. Do you want to do questions now, or do you just want to?
No, let's let Dell jump in and or Dell or James. I'm not sure who's walking through the landscape elements.
Dan, did you talk about the Rockery walls?
No, we're going to jump into that. I wanted to kind of separate the parking lot and then go through that,
Okay.
and then go through the bid schedule B. The gangways were part of bid schedule B, but that's fine.
Perfect.
We'll let Dell jump into the landscape elements.
Everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think I'm going to let James Davis walk through quickly go through the bid items and a rough overview of the first bid package. I think he's got a good, solid understanding of it, and so I'll turn it over to James.
All right, thanks, Del. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so landscape on this project is fairly straightforward. Our bid schedule for Schedule A, the first landscape item we're going to hit is some imported boulders going into our large bioswale by the lift station. Just some granite boulders. Our specs kind of define what we're sort of looking for there. We also have a 6-foot decorative security fence. It's going to be sort of a custom fabricated system, and those details actually will be coming out here in a few days in an addendum. Looks like Dan here is pulling up what we have so far. But that's just going to be by a linear foot cost. Our SP for this will define it as everything included. So the gate, as well as the fence, the footings, everything associated with this will be included in that bid item. So all incidentals. So make sure that that's accounted for. I guess while we're on this, Dan, do you want me to sort of go through this briefly, or you want to come back to the fence?
Sure, yeah, we might as well do that now. I
Okay.
can zoom in on any details you want to highlight.
Sure. So let's maybe zoom in on that first one briefly. We'll just sort of show the layout. So we have a fence that's going to go around the perimeter of this existing lift station. We're going to have one gate, and that's on that northwest corner. And that's going to be maintaining, we need access down there into the lift station. If you want to go to the second one, Dan, to the right there, this is kind of the standard profile of what we're envisioning. We've tried to design it in a way that we can have the post assemblies assembled and prefab prior to arrival on site, so they can be attached to the existing concrete wall. The footing that's been designed by a structural engineer will be poured on the outside, tied into the existing wall with some rebar, and then the plates will be attached with some anchors into the concrete. And then we've allowed some slots on those dog ear sort of plates there that allow the panels to then just be simply brought to site, bolted into those slots, and has a little bit of fine tuning adjustment on site. So we have a little bit of flexibility if something doesn't line up perfectly. We intend all the surfaces, it's all steel construction, powder coated. The finish and color, black matte finish, textured finish, that's defined there in the details there. So just take a look at that. And that's sort of the overview. We have the one gate, a hinged gate with a lever latching mechanism to be able to lock the gate when maintenance staff is not needed to get down into there. So again, we'll be sending these out, I think, within the next day or two, and an addendum. And so everybody will have an opportunity to look those over as well. So, okay, so jumping back quickly over to landscape, the next item on our bid form is automatic irrigation system. This is a square foot price for all irrigation for the bid tab A. That's going to include any necessary irrigation sleeving as well. So keep that in mind. I would like to point out, Dan, if you want to zoom in there towards the north, there is an existing sleeve that was installed during phase 2A, where he's pointing out, and that's where we've allowed to get under the existing flat work and run the main line and control wire to the rest of the project. So we just wanted to point that out, let you know that that is already in place. So we have two soils being brought in for this project as part of the landscape. We have a planting soil mix, which is defined in our spec. It's a mixture of imported topsoil and compost. We also have an imported bioswale mix for well-draining soil. That's going to occur at the large bioswale next to the west side of the lift station. There's also some small swales on the north perimeter by the street that's going to receive that treatment. And then what Nate was calling the mushroom pits down by the water, those small swales will also receive that bioswale mix. And that's soil mix is also defined in our specification, SP23, so take a look at that. So plants, everything is on a per plant basis, depending on size. It's pretty self-explanatory. Plant establishment, we have a separate pay item for plant establishment, and that is defined in our planting spec, SP24. And that's a spec specifically for the city of Sandpoint, how they like to see the plant establishment for a 1 year period. So make sure you take a look at that and account for those items when putting your bid together. I would like to point out we do have 3 different top dressing surfacing types in this project. We have a bark mulch, which is occurring in all landscape beds. We have a rock mulch, which is occurring in all of the bioswale areas. Any of those spaces that we're getting the bioswale soil mix is also getting a rock mulch to prevent any future erosion or washout problems. And we also have a dry stream bed cobble mix, which is happening in the bottom of that large retention bio area there to the left, to the west of the lift station. So just take note of that. We have some sod going in the project up on the north end. There's a little bit that's going in around the existing war memorial that we just want to make sure everyone, like it was brought up earlier, takes care when they're installing anything around that memorial that is to be, maintained and preserved, protected during this construction process. We have a little bit of turf repair in Schedule B that's happening on the south end, just along some of the hardscape area that may need to be repaired as asphalt path or concrete flat work is installed. So just be aware of that. I think that covers most of our landscape items for Schedule A there, Dan.
Great, thank you, James. Zach, can you walk us through the electricals as I find your drawings here?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as Dan kind of mentioned earlier with this project, one of the biggest things that we're trying to achieve or achieving with this project is it's a relocation of one of Avista's primary lines that serves the sewage lift station and the sewer plant or wastewater plant around to the southwest of this site. And so in phase 1A, we stubbed out some conduits to help get ready for this site down where Dan's showing it right there. If you go directly north of that, Dan, to the existing junction enclosure, just to your left, right there. That's where the existing junction enclosure is now, and we're going to be moving that over by the existing lift station to get that out of the way for the new parking lot. In order to do this, we have the conduit stubbed up to the south, and we're going to bring those around to the new location to bypass that basically the existing junction enclosure to relocate it. So this is going to need to be highly coordinated with Avista and the city regarding outages to complete all this work. So that's the biggest complicated part of the electrical install. The rest of the install deals with some parking lot lighting and then the extension of power to the new restroom facility for the CXT building. So everything is fairly straightforward on the job besides the coordination with Avista. Right there, Dan zooms into the front of the lift station. Can you zoom in, Dan, at all?
Do you see that?
There it goes. Mine's a little slow, I guess. This is where a lot of the utility infrastructure is going to go. So on the right-hand side there, you got the new junction enclosure, new utility transformer, and then we're going to have to backfeed from this utility transformer, backfeed the existing disconnects on the side of the lift station to complete the transfer or the relocation of the power to bypass the original primary feed. Also off of this, there's one feed that from the utility here that feeds the pump house along the lake shore that serves the park on the west side of the stadium. And so we're going to need to backfeed that with new conduit from the current disconnect. It's kind of just replacing it, getting it out of the way of where it's at now. We believe it's a direct buried wire now. So we're going to want to get that in conduit to preserve it. But yeah, Dan, I think that's most of what the electrical is. It's a pretty straightforward project from an electrical standpoint.
Agreed. A couple of things that James or excuse me, Nate mentioned earlier. We're stubbing electrical over to serve a future pressure wash station, boat rinse station, I should say. We're also running an empty conduit down to there's an existing solar light pole down at the bottom of the boat ramp, and we're just running a conduit there for now. It's an empty conduit. That's just in case the solar panel goes out in the future, we've got a conduit in while we're digging it up. And there's also a conduit to serve a future parking ticket kiosk, in this cluster in front of the lift station as well. Let's see. So the last couple items, I guess the last item on the bid form, once we get past electrical and bid schedule A, is a minor changes pay item. That's a contingent sum that we include and have included in prior phases of this project as well. It basically just allows for a less formal process in the event that minor issues come up, kind of owner directed changes in the work, that we've got a small pot of money to kind of draw from for those types of minor issues. Just a less formal process than a full-blown change order. So jump into bid schedule B, the boat launch. I think probably a good number of these items we can breeze through pretty quickly. Nate spoke to the SWIP and construction surveying, removal of obstructions, removal of existing concrete, all pretty self-explanatory items. Same with removal of existing asphalt on the ramp itself. I think probably jumping down to the tie-in to existing water service, Nate, might be where we want to start.
Yeah, so as part of phase one, we stubbed a 1-inch line across the parking lot. We are going to need to tie into that on the east side of the parking lot, and just run that line north to a new yard hydrant and to that service to that pressure boat wash down station. One thing the city will, I think Dan mentioned this, but they are intending to have their staff install the water meter. And so the contractor will need to provide access to them to be able to do that and coordinate it, as well as have that water line run to that point. But they will install the meter. And so that will just need to be coordinated with them. The next line item is the Rockery Wall. And so currently there's an existing Rockery Wall that runs along the north edge of the ramp. As part of this project, we are putting in an ADA trail, an asphalt trail that runs down. And in order to make the docks usable for a longer period of time, that ramp has pushed down, and so it's lower than the existing ground. And so that Rockery Wall is going to need to be rebuilt. It's roughly 9 feet today, and that wall's a couple feet low, or the ramp is a couple feet lower, so it's going to be 11 vertical feet. I think the slope on that was about 1.5 to 1. And so we're giving the contractor the flexibility to use all of the rocks that are there on site. You can see that rock wall extends quite a bit to the west. And then there's also going to be some over on the east edge as well that's going to be removed as the parking lot and the curb and gutter is extended a little bit there. So all of that rock is available to be used and relocated. We are asking the contractor to provide stamped plans of how they're intending to do anything over 4 feet. There is the city of Seattle has got guidelines for rockery walls under 4 feet, which can be used, and anything under 4 feet would not need to be stamped. But as mentioned, there will be a significant portion of this wall that will be over that 4 feet. Is there anything
What-
you wanted to add on that,
Yeah,
Dan?
thanks, Nate. One thing to add is a building permit is required for wall over 4 feet from discussions with the building official. So your stamp plans would feed that permit essentially. And our ultimate goal in this area is to construct as much as we can at a 3-to-1 max. So as much of this slope and quite a bit of this, if you've been on site, is just one large boulder, breaking grade here, but quite a bit of this can be graded at a 3-to-1 between the trails. We're planning to irrigate this. We'd like this mowable to the extent possible. So we're asking that anything that's not wall is 3-to-1 max. And you'll see on the irrigation plans, the ultimate plan for irrigation and sod in this area. But we also want any rock that is not used for the wall construction to be removed from the site, just so that we have a mowable surface to the extent possible.
One thing as well, that pavilion is just uphill of where we're working. We want to take every precaution to preserve that in place as well. So the next one, we've kind of talked about the concrete curb drops, the geotextile fabric under the asphalt. We've got the varying bases. One thing you will want to note is the boat ramp cross section. It's a pretty hefty section. And so you just want to, there is going to be a fair amount of excavation, which is accounted in the bid tab for that, as well as a lot of fill that's got to be brought in for that.
Just to be clear, Nate, the quantity that's in the bid tab is for the asphalt portion of the ramp, not the concrete portion, correct?
It does actually include the unsuitable under the ramp.
Okay.
The ramp only. All other flat work is considered incidental to the project or
Okay.
to the line item. So there's the 4-inch thick concrete flat work, which is the sidewalk just south that runs out around those mushroom pits. The 8-inch thick asphalt is the boat launch itself. There's some gutter that's running along the south edge of the ramp. And then we've kind of touched base already on the kayak launch and the gangways. Is there anything we need to say farther on those, Dan?
No, I don't think so. I think it looks like a couple of the more civil items are buried in this one, but the timber pilings and timber boom logs, and I think I'm back a few drawings, aren't I, for a good frame of reference here. The city has obtained those. They were largely donated. The city had to pay a little bit for stripping and peeling the logs, but all the timber piling you see on this drawing, as well as the boom logs, are going to be owner furnished. That's just the logs themselves. What we're asking is that the contractor notify the city at least 3 weeks in advance of when they'd like delivery, so we can coordinate that with I guess where they reside currently and get them ensure that they are delivered. But the specs for these, you can see, by minimum length, by location, based on ultimate projection above lake level and embedment requirements. I believe all the piling and boom logs will generally be probably closer to 35 feet than some of these, so there'll be some cutting required as well. Yeah, any other details regarding the timber piling or boom logs, including connection details, are in the plans and specifications. And we already spoke to the gangways. I think Nate covered that a little earlier. And then the CXT restroom pad prep, that includes the utilities as well. One thing to note, probably worth mentioning, on the utility plan, the existing sewer main is fairly deep at where we're anticipating that connection being made. yeah, 11 to 12 feet deep. So just keep that in mind when we're running this service line. And then before we turn it over back to James to speak to anything else on the irrigation landscape side, we also included a pay item for the use tax that the contractor, in this case, will pay for the donated items. That is a prescribed sum. It's a lump sum that we've entered for you based on the value of the donated boom logs and timber piling. Anything else that I missed, Nate, that before we turn it over to James?
No, I think we've covered kind of the main points.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Dan. So if I may jump in, one item I forgot to mention on our Schedule A, bid tab A for the landscape portion. There's potentially a future scoreboard going in on the north end. Maybe Dan, you could pull up our plan there. And yeah, so right in that lawn area there at the north, there's a potential for a future scoreboard, which is going to require some pretty significant footings. So we just wanted to point out that on our irrigation plan, we've purposely lined our main line and lateral pipe to the north perimeter of that and the south for our lateral lines to purposely leave an opening as much as possible for those footings for that potential future scoreboard. So I know, irrigation plans are typically diagrammatic, but in this case, we really want to try to keep those pipes out of the central zone of that turf area. So, okay, so jump into Schedule B for landscape. Really, there's one, issue here that's really outside of the norm. Dan, if you want to zoom in on the south end by the pump house. So what we have going here is, in essence, a second separate irrigation system from the rest of the site down in Schedule A. So we have an existing 6-inch main line coming from the pump house, and it's a 6-inch PVC heading northwest, and through that dash line, and then it takes a sudden jog to the west, down there a little further to the left there. Yeah, right there. So right there, it takes that main line, comes up from the pump house heading northwest, takes an angle directly due west. And that section of main line, because of the lowering of the ADA trail for the excavation to make that an ADA acceptable trail, what we're anticipating is that we're going to actually be uncovering that main line, and it's going to be too shallow. We're not going to have enough cover. So there's a section of main line there that will need to be removed and lowered down with a minimum coverage of 18 inches. But we're not sure exactly where that ends, and so that's why we've defined sort of a zone with that note there saying connects new 6-inch PVC main line to existing at a minimum. Somewhere within that zone is where we anticipate that grade working out, where we can reconnect and avoid that lowered trail. So that's something to make note of. There's a short section, an isolation valve, existing quick coupler, that short section of old 6-inch main line heading more north. Yeah, that section there that needs to be removed completely during that process, and it will no longer be used. So tying in right down there by the pump house, we have a point of connection that's called out as O2. That's actually an existing 2-inch tap from that 6-inch main line that's feeding an automatic remote valve. And what we plan to do is remove that valve, utilize the existing 2-inch tap, and that will feed a new 2-inch main line, which will run north. That'll feed a bank of valves, isolation, and quick coupler there to the right. And then it'll continue north. It will go underneath the new path, and it'll feed another bank of valves with a few isolation valves and a quick coupler, which will supply water to the new irrigation zones, feeding those new turf areas and that graded 3-to-1 slope that Dan and Nate had mentioned a few minutes ago. So we just want you to be aware there are 2 points of connection on this. That's sort of the intent for that lower end. That's really the only other kind of thing outside the norm on Schedule B. Along the east perimeter, I'd also like to mention for all of the planting and irrigation that happens along that eastern perimeter there are some known utility lines, there's a fiber optic line, and we just want to make sure that all trades are coordinating very closely, civil, electrical, and landscape irrigation contractors to make sure that all of those lines are accounted for, and we don't end up, destroying something that's existing. So just make a note of that. Coordination will be key on this. So, thanks, Dan.
Thank you, James. Zach, is there anything you want to add on this Schedule B for the boat launch related to electrical, or is it, you think you mostly covered?
I think I covered most of it. It's very limited to the electrical work that's associated with the boat launch.
Okay.
I think we have some conduit in there for some future pathway lighting and stuff like that. But other than that, I don't think there's much.
Yep, that's a good point. Some of this work here is to facilitate future pathway lighting associated with future phases of improvements at the site. So again, trying to plan ahead and not have to tear things up that we didn't think about now. So I guess at that, I think we'll open it up to questions from bidders. I think we've walked through, unless Dell, design team, James, Nate, Zach, is there anything you want to add at this point? Or I think we've covered what we wanted to. Okay, so I guess we'll open it up to bidders. And if I'm not mistaken, Cheryl, I think they can click the raise hand button, and does that then allow them, you a prompt to allow them to talk, hopefully?
Hey, Dan, it's Melissa. And yes, on the raise your hand option, we can call on folks if they're interested in asking a question.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So we'll give it a couple minutes. If a bidder has any questions, we're happy to answer them now.
Yeah. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, Dan.
Okay. If we don't have any questions, appreciate everybody's time today. One thing I did want to offer, if anybody is in town and available, I'd be happy to conduct a quick site visit now if anybody would like to do so. And you can raise your hand and let me know if that's something you're interested in. Otherwise, I do not intend to visit the site today.
Let me put my video on. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can't hear you at all.
You can't hear me?
There they are.
Okay. Muted.
Okay, well, seeing no hands raised, no questions or site visit, I think we will conclude the pre-bid meeting today. Appreciate everybody's time. And if you do have questions, please send those in writing to Cheryl, and she will make sure they're disseminated to myself and the design team. But I hope everybody has a good day.